Now, so that heard from HP. At this point, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sandra from IDC to give you an external view of the marketplace and what customers are looking for.
Very good morning. It's always a great pleasure for me to present in front of media because it makes you feel like a superstar. The lives of the analyst is a lot less glamorous than that. So as John mentioned, basically my role this morning is to essentially share with you the perspective of the customers. Now, in the Asia-Pacific region, we're very fortunate to quickly move from what we call market recovery to the early stage of market expansion. And as we move through this phase, we are seeing a number of key implications in the marketplace. There are two very specific that I would like to highlight because of this mode. The first is that if you look at organizations, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about small business or large organizations, this rapid move from market recovery to market expansionary has made organizations realize that there is a need to manage change more aggressively. And you see this throughout my presentation. So the need to be able to effectively manage change is a key implication as a result of this move. Second is about supporting growth. Last year we talked about cutting people, cutting costs. This year we talk about growth and the management of growth. This too has huge implications from a technology and obviously from a print perspective. Now I want to first talk about what does it mean in terms of these changes to both the SMB as well as the enterprise environment. Now when we look at SMB and enterprise, I'm referring from two perspectives. One is in terms of company size, as we normally would regard these two categories. The second is when you look at printing and imaging, SMB versus enterprise can also mean an unmanaged or managed environment. Because it doesn't mean that if you're a small business, then automatically you're in an unmanaged environment. You can be in a managed environment, meaning that your use of printing and technology is relatively savvy. And of course the reverse for some of the larger enterprises across the Asia-Pacific region. So let's look at the SMB, or relatively speaking, the less managed or unmanaged environment. The two key implications, one, the power of Cs. Cs here referring to content, referring to commerce, obviously in recent times will be cloud services. Now, one of the biggest impact is consumerization in the SMB marketplace. And what that means is if you look at social media, you look at consumer products, you look at consumer services and solutions, and how they actually have a huge impact in terms of how SMB actually deploy products and services in the environment. And this 32% here refers to the percentage of, or rather the percentage increase in terms of smartphone sales across the Asia-Pacific, excluding Japan region, for this calendar year 2010. And the reason why I want to use smartphone because this is one of the fastest growing market segments in the Asia-Pacific region. This is one of the superstars last year. If you look at markets like here in mainland China, it's a very high growth market segment, and it has huge implications for SMB in terms of the way that they use technology. And John earlier talked about one of the strategies and one of the exciting news that HP is going to bring to you today is what does it mean between mobility and the printing environment. Then the second is IT matter more. Now if you look at the large enterprise environment, they use IT in a very, I guess relatively speaking, in a much more effective way, and they have realized this for many, many years. For the SMB environment, or the less managed environment, this is a somewhat new phenomenon. And the 36% here is referring to percentage of organizations that will use IT more aggressively in 2010. So that's a pretty significant number if you look at the SMB environment. Then the enterprise environment, as a CIO, a Chief Information Officer, basically one of your biggest challenge this year is about balancing cost and growth. Because as I said, last year was all about managing costs in terms of cost reduction. This year, and from our recent survey, it has actually indicated that the majority of enterprises will only increase their ICT budget, internal and external combined, at less than 20%. So best case scenario is 19% for CIOs in the large enterprise environment. But if you look at business units growth and the expected growth in terms of business unit, that's going to be a lot greater than that. So this balancing act from a CIO perspective is going to be really critical. And then the last point is about cash is king. Last year is about cutting costs. This year is about how can you manage your cash flow. So because we're getting into this expansion mode, we need cash for investments, right? So a lot of companies are looking at what are the technologies, what are the solutions, what are the areas of investment that can help them to actually manage and generate better cash flow. And this 4x number here shows you basically in the next 5 years in terms of contractual-based pricing model, contract-based printing services, it will grow 4 times as a result of this move from CapEx to OpEx, and that's all about cash being king. So when we look at organizations, we tend to want to look at it from a business perspective first rather than technology, because at the end of the day, it is not really the technologies that they deploy, but it is really what they mean in terms of the overall business environment. And this came from our most recent survey just done last month. It's actually what we call the IDC Top of Mind survey. Here we talk to organizations across the Asia-Pacific region, from the smallest to the largest, including public sector. And we asked them, what are the top business challenges? The number 1 came out to be achieving healthy cash flow and total cost of reduction in order to invest in, or obviously, areas of growth. And that represents 30% of the marketplace. Then if you look at the rest, the number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on and so forth, it's all about operations productivity, it's all about greater customer satisfaction, it's all about responding and managing in an uncertain market environment. And what this really means from a technology and from a print perspective is about IT and business alignment. Now we talk about this for a long time, but this becomes extremely critical as organizations try to balance cost and growth. The second is about having more effective in terms of management tools. That's the reason why in recent times you've seen high growth of managed print services as well as document solution, because of the need for greater intelligence, obviously greater management, in order to drive efficiency, productivity, and automation. I talked a little bit about this earlier, about the CIO challenge. For the CIO, in order to manage the kind of business challenges that I talked about in my earlier slide, is to really manage cost and supporting growth in order to deliver business KPI. And that's where the cash is king and the drive of CapEx and OpEx becomes extremely critical. So as we look at those challenges, and as you see the marketplace move from recovery to the early phase of expansionary, these are the 3 key customer trends and insights that we are expecting moving forward. Some of these we have already seen in the recent quarter of this calendar year, and we will see that accelerate across the Asia-Pacific region. First is about flight to value. Now, in the previous economies, or crises I should say, I've gone through personally 5 over my career, it's about flight to safety. It's about going with the safest route, because you want to make sure that you secure a job, you want to make sure that you don't get fired for choosing the wrong brand or the wrong product or the wrong solution. In this crisis, because of the intensity and because obviously of the global nature of this crisis, we have seen this notion around flight to value being more important and taking a higher priority. And in terms of from an implication perspective for both IT and print, is really these 4 key factors: IT, financing, and leasing. This is probably one of the highest growth areas for technology vendors like HP, whereby over the last year we have seen an increase in terms of adoption of financing as well as leasing contracts when companies go for technologies and print solution. Second, managing cloud services. Here we talk about managed print services, which is one of the highest growth in the marketplace. Of course, we recently talked about cloud-enabled print services as well as document solution. Then green IT and sustainability. This is really about energy savings. John talked a little bit about that in terms of part of the HP strategy. HP is one of the largest and most aggressive players in the space, and going forward we're going to see more and more implication because as the market expands, oil prices are definitely going to be going up. And then, of course, total cost of ownership. As I say, it is not about the cost of a particular solution or a particular device, but it's the overall cost reduction or management of that cost within the business environment. So if you look at it from a product or feature perspective, and this is extremely critical if you look at the SMB environment. So we went out to the marketplace and asked SMBs, what are the top 3 features or attributes that are important to the organization when they acquire a new printer/copier? And the first came up to cost to operate. As you notice from this slide, the number 2 is hardware price. A lot of medias and journalists typically call IDC, and usually they will say, is the cost of the hardware the number 1 driving factor behind procurement? As you can see here, it is number 2. So it is still important, but the most important for organization is the overall cost of operation, which means you look into consumables and supplies, you look at obviously the hardware cost, as well as the running cost and the overall management of the device and the solution. Now, one other thing that I want to highlight here is multifunctional all-in-one, which is the 5th most important feature. Some of you might say, well, I thought all-in-one is actually growing. Why is it number 5 and the lowest if you look at this ranking? This is because when you go out and talk to any organization, even if you talk to the IT department, they typically don't talk about product features. They typically don't talk about the technical aspect. So they don't really care if this product is all-in-one or not. They don't really care whether this is green or not, unless that feature has implications in terms of supporting the overall business objectives. Whether that business objective being overall cost reduction, whether this is liquidity management, which is about managing cash flow, or this is about business process efficiency and optimization. Then we move on to, from device, we move on to services and solutions. And we wanted to understand, because we have seen a lot of numbers out there, and we have seen a lot of growth even when we track printing solutions. And managed print services, as I said earlier, is definitely one of the highest growth categories. So we wanted to go and understand from the customer perspective, what does this mean? So if you look at from this particular survey results, which we talked to more than 500 organizations across the region, managed print services came up to be the number 1 area where organizations implement or will implement as part of their cost management strategy for hard copy devices. And hard copy devices will be referring to printing and imaging. So this is definitely an area where organizations see that, and organizations understand that it will help to achieve their overall business objective today as well as moving forward. The second key customer trend is about business process effectiveness. And we, again, went out to the marketplace to ask the SMEs about basically what are some of the changes that they have made to reposition and to realign themselves in terms of the recovery and as we get into the expansionary mode. So how do they kind of manage change in this environment? The number 1 reason came out to be focused on business process improvement. Again, it is not so much about just managing costs, but it is about business process improvement. Second is about developing new offerings to remain competitive. What does it mean from a printing and imaging perspective? A lot of people look at printing and imaging as an office automation type solution for their business environment, and that obviously ties in very well to the number 1 factor, which is business process improvement. But what does it mean when an organization is looking at developing new offerings to remain competitive? Already there are some organizations that use printing solutions to in a very creative manner to enhance their offerings in the marketplace. And we have seen that from the retail industry all the way to your general business marketplace. Then the third is about investing in customer care. Remember, I talk about high growth and I talk about getting into this mode of expansion, and this is where customer care becomes extremely important. And if you look at from a printing solution perspective, this is about using and leveraging and harnessing print technologies and solutions in both the pre-sale and the post-sales segments of your client engagement in order for you to enhance customer experience. And in today's climate, everyone is trying to chase the next customer. Everyone is trying to go out and chase new customer. And that's where customer care becomes extremely critical for organizations to harness technologies in order to realize, obviously, the additional top line and the bottom line objectives. The other components of business process effectiveness, especially with regard to printing solutions, are device and supplies management. A lot of organizations, especially the unmanaged ones, they look at printing solution as if, well, it's a device. But as we all know that if you just look at it from a device perspective, it is not going to, firstly, help you from a total cost reduction perspective. Secondly, it's certainly not going to be as effective in terms of managing the entire business process. Now, 45% of the organizations are already, or they are planning in the next 12 months to use managed print services to manage both devices and the overall print environment. And here we're talking about supplies management. So 45%, that's a pretty significant number. The second is 39% of organizations are using and will be deploying what we call document solution or document process outsourcing in the Asia-Pacific region to manage and to automate workflow and business process. And then finally, mobility. Now, mobility is extremely important for our region because we have a lot of mobile workers. 32% of our workforce in Asia-Pacific region is considered to be mobile. And this can be talking about salespeople, this can be talking about support engineers that travel within the domestic market, like here in China, but in different cities. Or it can be referring to executives traveling in international markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, whereby a high proportion of workforce actually travel outside of those countries. So all of this have huge implications in terms of the adoption of technology as well as print solution. And then finally, business growth support. As I said, this is a very important area of priority for more and more organizations going forward. And obviously, when we talk about business growth, we need to talk about customer engagement. And this is in both the pre-sale as well as the post-sale stage. From a print solution perspective, creative delivery, innovative outreach programs are generally the ones that organizations use, and there are still a lot of possibilities out there. I'm fortunate enough, obviously, to be briefed by HP and to look at some of the customer examples that they have demonstrated of all the creative and possible solutions out there in terms of enhancing customer experience. This 15% basically is referring to the growth that we're expecting in terms of customer care, business process outsourcing across Asia-Pacific region. For some of you, 15% might not be very high. It really depends on what market that you are in, but 15% is higher than the average, than the industry average that we're seeing. So definitely customer care is growing at a much faster pace moving forward as compared to many of the other business process. And so as my closing slide, before I pass it back to John, I just want to close in terms of kind of two key points here on the SMB market and on the enterprise market. If you look at the SMB market, it very much started off as from a device perspective. And the majority of organizations look at device and they always talk about the value in the device. And we see that. As more organizations look at managed print services, which I talked about the 45% earlier, that's where you see the value in terms of usage and overall management. Then you move up the value chain, you get into application. That's talking about innovative and creative applications of printing solutions and technology in order to drive the overall value for your organization. If you look at the enterprise or the managed environment, it's slightly a different picture. It started off in terms of IT business alignment. Larger organizations, the more savvy organizations, they understand this. Now, obviously, this is a journey, this is an ongoing process whereby companies are looking at how they can intelligently integrate and align IT and business in order to drive the overall business objectives. Then we see them move towards what I call intelligent control. And this is about visibility, this is about transparency, so that organizations can better and more effectively manage this change. At the very beginning of the presentation, I talk about the aggressiveness in terms of managing change. and that we have 36% of the organizations that will actually look at technology and print solutions on how they can better manage change in this rapidly changing environment. And then finally, intelligent automation. If you ask any CIO, automation is the nirvana stage, and this is the stage where every CIO would like to get to so that they can actually manage more effectively. Without automation, it's going to be very difficult to drive efficiency, it's very, very difficult to reach an optimal level, and to be able to effectively harness technologies, including printing solution. So that's my last slide. I hope that gives you a quick 15-minute viewpoint on where we see customers' trends and where we see customers moving forward in both the SMB as well as the enterprise space. I will be here throughout today as well as participating in the enterprise panel tomorrow. So I'll be happy to take questions, and obviously if you want quotes, again, I'll be happy to give some to you. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to Joy.